Welcome, I'm Sam Faddis. This is Ground Truth, and we're going to be talking things Iranian today. With us, a great guest, old friend, colleague, uh, John Maguire, who is a whole bunch of things. We could spend the next 25 minutes just kind of probably laying out Mr. Maguire's bio, but he is I think if you go to Washington D.C. these days, you can't swing a dead cat without hitting somebody who says he's an intelligence officer. And as far as I can tell, 99.9% of them have never left Northern Virginia. That is not who we're talking to today. We're talking to a guy who has spent his career abroad, running ops and meeting sources, and who is still active, still travels regularly to the Middle East, particularly Syria, Iraq. So is up to his eyeballs in current information as well on things Iranian. And we won't go into any specific details on groups, but has a lot of contacts with the Iranian opposition as well. John, welcome.
Thank you, Sam. Good to be here.
So, look, one of the things we do with Ground Truth is we actually try to do something incredibly revolutionary. We actually try to provide facts to people instead of just sort of screaming and ranting, and which is why having guests like you on is so critical. Folks who can actually talk to a subject. And I'm looking at this. I think you and I are looking at this as the first episode we've done in a little while, focused on Iran and kind of a foundation that will allow us to come back and revisit the issue periodically. Um, and from the perspective of what's going on in Iran and what we should be doing and what the prospects are for finally ending this nightmare that has existed in Iran since the fall of the Shah in 1979. The hostage taking and that whole thing. So, from your perspective, what's the situation inside Iran now? I mean, what can you tell us about what's going on there in the country?
Well, Sam, there's an amazing amount of activity going on inside of Iran now. You're looking at a revolution that, in large measure, is unknown to most of the youth in the country. It's just old history stuff. And at 40 years on, it's stale. And the corruption, the systemic collapse of the infrastructure and processes of running a modern country have just all deteriorated and eroded over these many years. And the population of Iran is very proud. They're an educated population. They're technically astute at keeping themselves in touch with people on the outside. And the regime is gone in the other direction and is seeking personal survival now. The primary goal of the regime is to keep power and hold on. And the IRGC, while all this has gone on with the pandemic virus and all this stuff that's stirred the entire planet up, everyone is focused on, certainly here, focused on the virus, but the Iranians and the Chinese are focused on cementing their close personal military, technological, and money relationship. And it appears to be occurring right under our noses, but I see nothing that from the U.S. side that would indicate that there's an attention onto this factor. And a couple of the factors are very disconcerting on the national security front.
So let me just go back just a couple of steps here, because before we move on, getting heavy into policy and so forth. One of the things that I think happens in the United States, and this is certainly true with China, equally as true with Iran, is somehow or another, because these regimes have been in power for X number of decades, we start a large portion of the population, and certainly the press, mainstream press, starts assigning them some degree of legitimacy. In other words, well, it's been a long time since the Ayatollahs came to power in Tehran, and that means somehow that the Iranian people want this, that the Iranian people writ large actually want to continue to live under this regime, and we should be trying to accommodate that. My position is always, look, they held our people hostage for 444 days. They've held their own people hostage for decades. now? I mean, what's your perspective on that? To what extent is this a regime that enjoys any legitimacy internally?
That's a great question, Sam, because the most recent example of where the population is when the president took the difficult decision to make a paradigm change in our engagement with them on the offensive side and the terrorism side by striking at Qasem Soleimani in January. The people in Iran that flowed out into the street that morning at dawn when the word went around what had happened were not protesting America. They were cheering the death of Qasem Soleimani. The population hated him because he controls the instruments that were used by the regime to put down the street protests. And they were responsible for killing an unknown number. I mean, some of the estimates are hugely diverse in the scale of it, but suffice it to say, a lot of Iranians died at the hands of Qasem Soleimani's Quds Force people, Lebanese Hezbollah operatives that were operating with the Basij in the cities, riding around or sneaking around, posing as journalists or photography people, and were shooting people dead in the streets to try and kill the agitators to diffuse the street population. Their biggest concern in the regime security apparatus today is holding on inside Iran. A confrontation with the United States would give them some breathing space to try and unite the population. But the regime is wildly unpopular. The theocracy is openly mocked today by young citizens in Iran. And then the IRGC has almost totally unnoticed since the beginning of this pandemic in January, has cemented their relationship with the Chinese Communist Party with some strategic agreements that are now being implemented to take over a leasing arrangement for the Chinese military on Kish Island and the Chobahar port on the Indian Ocean. These are huge developments, and the Iranian people see this because people that live on Kish Island are being told that they have to move. And if they don't move, they'll be moved off the island as they make that into some type of a long-term lease base for the Chinese, with the exchange of an enormous amount of money paid as a lease arrangement. You know, how is that going to be squared with the sanctions regime if the Chinese are doing essentially what we do? When you look at Diego Garcia, for instance, we have a lease, and they're doing the same thing to project military power around the region. The IRGC has silenced theocracy. I don't remember the last time anybody really saw, after the funeral of Qasem Soleimani, the Ayatollah. Where is he? Where is the religious leadership? The IRGC is cementing their hold on the country because they like the Chinese Communist Party model for exercising complete control over the government and the citizenry. There's a lot of moving parts inside Iran, but the IRGC is moving with alacrity to get this done while they have a window of inattention from the West.
Yeah, and there's another piece. I mean, there's so many pieces to this, but another dimension that somehow seems to get totally lost in so much of what passes for the press in the West these days. We have these ayatollahs who came to power, of course, preaching all sorts of piety and you know, they're there to save the nation ostensibly from the evils of Western influence and so forth. And yet at the same time, I mean, not only have they perpetuated all kinds of evil, but the level of hypocrisy is just astounding. I mean, we're not just talking about one of the most oppressive regimes on the planet, but one of the most corrupt regimes on the planet. I mean, most of these IRGC guys, that whole edifice is up to its eyeballs in corruption. While they're complaining these days that their people are suffering such hardship, these guys are not, you know, they're not scraping by. They're getting rich off of that country.
Yeah, the Ayatollah Khomeini is a great example of that. He has become one of the wealthiest men in Iran as a result of what's happened since the invasion of Iraq. He owns the theocracy makes money on every pilgrim that comes there from Iran to see the sights in Iraq, and for anybody going back the other way. He owns the airline system that runs from the Najaf. I mean, these guys are raking in resources every single day inside Iraq as they pillage that economy. The estimates on how much money is stolen out of Iraq that goes directly to Iran, again, that's a figure that ranges wildly. But even if it's somewhere in the middle or even on the low end, it's still an enormous amount of money and resources that are funneling into the regime elites' coffers. These guys have amassed incredible wealth, and they've got that wealth distributed outside the country in a variety of places that protects their wealth. And you're well aware of how poor we are at trying to identify where these dictatorships hide their cash. They're a hell of a lot better at it than we are at finding it. And we're in a situation now where the wealth is so disparity in wealth between the population and the theocracy is at its highest point, which creates this friction and the fear that the population will rise up and they won't be able to control it inside Iran. They had the demographic time bomb went off in Iran. With you have more than 50, I believe it's about 57% of the population is below the age of 35. They have no memory of the revolution, and they don't have any connection to that whole concept. It's just not, they're not interested. And then they're stuck in an economy that doesn't allow them to get a job, to move out of their families' houses, to get married, to get, if you can get a passport, you can't get a visa to go anywhere. And they're embarrassed by it and frustrated and angry. And that number continues to grow.
So, I mean, one of the things that I want to move on to talking about policy in a second because kind of set the stage for follow-on conversations. But so much of what you're saying, it really echoes with me because you're talking about Iran. We're talking about Persia. We're talking about one of the world's great civilizations, right? When the Greeks were trying to define themselves as heroes thousands of years ago, it was because they were confronting the Persians, meaning that's the superpower of the age. If you could fight these guys, that's why why the Spartans are so great, because oh my God, they can actually stand up to the might of the Persian Empire. This civilization that's been around for thousands of years, that's now been hijacked by these guys preaching ignorance and just sort of dragging this great civilization and this great people off into like the dark ages. I mean, it's horrifying, really.
It is. It really is. And it's embarrassing for normal Iranian citizens who are well educated. They're proud of their history. They're proud of their country. They look at the art and their historical reference points that are all over the country, that are beautiful sites that no one can come and visit. And it's a terribly embarrassing thing. And they're working. I mean, when you've got a situation now where the regime's primary goal is to stay in power, and we're used in that struggle to stay in power. The political system in the United States is so distracted with the coronavirus, and then all the headwinds that have come at this president over the last 3 years, and then you have people like Kerry giving advice to people out there to just ride this out till November of 2020, which is a conflicting narrative. I've heard that from officials, intelligence officials in Iraq and Syria, and from inside Iran. People are confused by the messaging that's coming from the United States, and they don't understand how this administration can continue on like this. There's anxiety and concern about what they see going on in the United States. And I don't see any responsible conduct in Washington about this. The president's doing everything in his power to push this stuff forward, the policy issues, and deal with these problems as they come. But there's only so much bandwidth that you have sitting in the White House to do things. It's just their plate is full of really important, difficult issues.
Yeah, the Kerry thing is stupefying to me because you think about I don't want to get sidetracked, but in the last week we've been talking all about General Flynn and reminded how he had as he was coming in as the new national security advisor, a couple of phone conversations with the Russian ambassador, which basically is standard operating procedure for a new administration. And yet somehow or another, the FBI director and who knows who else found that so alarming that they got to send FBI agents into the Oval Office to try to destroy him.
Yeah.
And yet we have John Kerry, former Secretary of State and Senator, talking past this administration all day, every day to the Iranians, saying exactly what you just said. Hey, pay no attention to that guy. He'll be out of there soon.
Yep.
Completely subverting American foreign policy.
Exactly. And people overseas recognize what occurred with the FBI and the director of the CIA and others in the senior leadership of the last administration. They correctly assess what that is because they deal with that in their own cultures. It was a coup d'etat, and they use that phrase. That phrase isn't, most Americans probably have to look it up what it means, to be honest about it. But Washington takes for granted that people aren't focusing on what's going on outside of our borders, and they are, and they're running at flat neck speed in open field running now because they see opportunity to position themselves in a better situation because the U.S. is so distracted with all the noise that's going on back here. Only our enemies are the ones that haven't stopped at all in what their strategic plans are, and we've let go 50 to 70%. I've heard all kinds of numbers on federal employees that have been sent home, including the intelligence community. I'm absolutely certain that the Russian intel system, Iranian system, and China have not sent half the workforce home to stay home and self-quarantine, shelter in place. I mean, that kind of stuff doesn't sit well overseas. They look at it and they assess it, I believe, correctly, that the U.S. is really at a disadvantage right now, and we should exploit it every way we can. And the Iranians just fired that missile shot that took place a couple of weeks ago. Just this morning, an overhead imagery picture was published, came out of Iran, of supposedly an Israeli nuclear site, taking a satellite photo from their new satellite. It looks to me to be a photoshopped picture that came out in 2006 of the same facility, but nevertheless, inside Iran, it makes the people think, because that's internal consumption information, they fired a missile, which is a prohibited launch of a military satellite by a ballistic missile, and nothing happened. It was a blip on the news and then gone. And that is played back inside Iran like we are an invincible power. God is on our side, and our revolution is going to continue on. And the window of opportunity created by the strike on Soleimani has now closed because there was no follow-on with that style of management and directive. We've gone back to the same old thing of periodically we blow up an ammunition storage facility in Syria, or we hit something in Iraq. It's the tit for tat kind of thing that doesn't make any impact at all inside Iran. We've now traversed back to where they're comfortable with what we're doing. The Soleimani strike threw them a curveball that they've never seen since the revolution. That really got their attention. They were rattled. I think they're still rattled, but the fact is they haven't seen any follow-on, and they know how vulnerable they are.
Yeah, I mean, I think you and I have talked about this before, and I've had this conversation with numerous other individuals. I think one of the many horrible effects of this ongoing, what I agree was a coup attempt that has consumed really the first 3 years of this administration, is that we're still sitting in a position where this president does not fully have control over the national security and intelligence apparatus of the United States, because people have fought him tooth and nail because of these actions. And you can see it with exactly what you just said, which is periodically we take a step like killing Soleimani, who should have died a long time ago, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And then But then, as fast as the president of necessity has to turn his gaze somewhere else, all of a sudden, just business as usual comes creeping back in. Because he doesn't have outs still in critical positions the right people. So let me open this up because I got maybe another 5 minutes here or so. Okay, so we're not going to be able to exhaust this topic, but we can at least start on it. What should we be doing? What should U.S. policy be, and what should we be doing concretely? Because I think, like I think you do, that there frankly is a very real possibility of regime change in Tehran if we do this right.
I agree with you, Sam. I think we've got a better opportunity now to just, we don't have to be directly involved. The Iranians do not want the U.S. to do anything to strike at the regime. It's just information. If they have the ability to communicate internally and communicate to the outside, even when the regime in times of stress will turn the bandwidth down for the country, if you can continue to keep communication circuits open inside Iran, the Iranian people are at their limits. And the thing that I've discovered talking to people that are coming out of Iran into northern Iraq in particular is the same theme. It's that if we can just communicate with ourselves internally, the regime cannot maintain control over the whole country. There's so many things that are wrong. We just need our ability to talk, and we'll sort it out ourselves. We don't need any external involvement. But back here, we have this constant lament of regime change, and everything is a soundbite that gets thrown out into the public arena of discussion. What we're looking for inside Iran is let the Iranian people handle that and focus their attention inward. Our biggest problem is fixing the mess that we have in Iraq. If you can pull the Iranians away from and get a central government or some type of structure in Iraq that can govern themselves and stop the flow of resources out of Iraq into Iran, the situation in Iraq could begin to stabilize because they're vulnerable as well. The population protests there were enormous. They were impacted by the coronavirus, but overall that sentiment is there. It certainly wasn't assuaged by this natural medical disaster. It's still boiling white hot. There's no jobs, there's no money, the power grid's fouled up, and that spills into Syria and spills into Lebanon. The Iranians are holding on to these pieces, and if they begin to lose these pieces, the situation for them inside Iran becomes inherently more dangerous. And what I had hoped would happen when the Soleimani strike occurred, that we would begin at any opportunity, because the president said all the right things. And I find it striking that the most popular site inside Iran for gathering information about the United States is the whitehouse.gov news site. People there read what's going on, and that comes from the White House every day, and they focus on statements from Secretary Pompeo and the White House like a laser. They're getting their information right from the source. That's a powerful megaphone that the White House has to influence events with just messaging. And the situation in Iraq can be adjusted on the ground because Mohandas was killed in the strike with Soleimani. There were 13 other people. All of those were bad players. We should be eroding the instruments of state that the Iranians use as surrogates. That's their greatest strength, their unconventional warfare capability, and all the surrogate fighting forces that do their bidding, and the PMUs as well. That's a target-rich environment in Syria, Yemen, and Iraq. And the more we do to erode their external collection and control instruments, that's a financial bleed on them that is very serious for everybody across the region. And the Iranian people, their big fear is the U.S. will strike inside Iran with some kind of a strike, and then the population will be forced to choose between their own nationalistic government and the U.S. As long as we don't strike inside Iran, you can really hurt the regime's ability to project power, and they lose resources exponentially as the spigot turns down from Iraq and those forces that's expensive to run big programs like that across all the way to Yemen. That financial strain could really crush them. And I thought a lot of us did, and certainly the Iranians did. They thought the strike on Soleimani was the opening a paradigm change, where the U.S. is now finally looking at this the right way, and they're going to burn down the Iranian force projection capacity, and that will weaken the regime. Because every one of those senior leadership figures that they kill, like Soleimani in Yemen or Iraq, those are not readily replaceable people. They don't have a strong bench. They don't have guys lined up to take these positions with the charisma and the combat experience and the just the inherent operational acumen to do these kinds of things. And the faster we do that, the more strain is on the regime.
Yeah, well, and you and I both know from experience in the field that once the likelihood that you're going to get killed becomes real, all sorts of guys who were all full of bluster and big talk yesterday begin to have second thoughts,
Mm-hmm.
Soleimani was a rock star and paraded around openly all over the Middle East. It boggles my
Mm-hmm.
mind that people now continue to act like this was the first time we could have killed this guy. We could have killed this guy so many times. There's no end to it, and yet
Yep.
he was allowed to behave this way. Now, in a different world where that's not true, real fast you're going to find that, yeah, the guy who was all filled with Islamic vim and vigor yesterday is not necessarily in all that big a hurry to go to paradise today, despite the protest. I assume you're talking about targeting, tearing apart this apparatus that the Iranians have outside of Iran, and all of this is based, I assume, on the foundation that we maintain the sanctions in place and continue to ratchet those down. Starve these guys for money.
Absolutely, Sam. And the one thing the Iranians, the constant lament in there is the sanctions are working. Don't worry about us. Just keep squeezing the regime. Don't let up, because money is the Achilles heel for them. And if there's only about, not only, but there's 6 or so primary guys left inside Iraq. We know who they are. If that was treated quickly, every opportunity, not, you don't have to use it as preemptive stuff, because I know the president doesn't want to expand the war, and you don't have to. But if we strategically weaken them at every opportunity, if they shoot a missile into one of our bases, we should kill 200 or 300 PMU people, including the leadership. One or two missiles land in a base, 200 people get killed. 1 or 2 missiles hit some other location, you hit another PMU area. It doesn't matter about hitting ammunition depots. That doesn't have the same effect. It's impersonal. If you're going to wage war like this in that region, it has to be a cost personally. And when you start losing those PMUs, the population in Iraq is watching them, because in many areas of the country, the PMU's atrocities were equal to, and in some cases in excess of, what they suffered under ISIS. And the Iraqi people are tired of this situation. And given an opportunity, when there is a perception of weakness in the PMUs, or they see the PMUs beginning to have to worry about being killed every time they're out in a truck with their flag up, and they're all driving around like that, that has an impact. It emboldens the people on the ground inside the country. And those kinds of things are cost effective. I understand exactly where the administration is coming from with the burn rate on money for these endless wars. We're on the right track. Just attrip the stuff, burn the ability of the Iranians to conduct unconventional war across the theater, cost them money, and stretch them as hard and as far as we can every opportunity that they give us to strike at them. And then we'll be able to pull down and draw down, because the Iraqis, once you get some stable government in Baghdad, you'll have a situation where Iraq will it'll level out. We're basically on the same track, Sam, that you and I were on in 2003.
Yes.
on what we hoped we would be able to shape in Baghdad.
Yes.
We have come full circle right back to where we were in 2003 and 2004.
Yeah.
And when we went in another direction, we caused an opportunity to surface for Iran, and they took it. And
Yeah.
they've run us ragged since.
Yeah. I could not possibly agree more. But for listeners who aren't familiar with the term, we're talking about PMUs. We're talking about popular mobilization units, and this is my characterization. In essence, Shia militia, Hezbollah clones that have been created by the Iranians in Iraq to do their bidding. So last question for you. I mean, for today, um, are there, in your estimation, and I'm not asking you for names of any groups, are there, in your estimation, groups, entities within Iran with whom we could work successfully?
Yes. Short answer, yes. Longer answer is we have to change the way we conduct our operational stuff in order to be able to build any trust with people like this. Because the way the intelligence community is structured and works today, it's an anathema to the way the societies that we're trying to deal with are set up and structured. We are disconnected, and I believe, this is just my personal opinion, that we are no longer nimble. It's like we have a field manual that says this is how you do this, and we've got a model for the last 18 years of this conflict that began on 2001 in the theater, and we're still trying to do things that way. You can't deal with a society like Iran doing things that way. And that's the problem that they have. That's why a lot of people in Iran won't talk. They don't want to talk to the official system of the U.S. government. They see it as nothing but risk. I'll get exposed, my name will get leaked,
Yep.
because the U.S. system is penetrated by the Iranian intelligence and security system and influence peddlers that are in the United States, and especially in the State Department. The average Iranian despises the department because they don't understand why people that they know are Iranian agents of influence have prominent voices inside the U.S. government. It scares them to death, and that keeps them away from us. And the Iranians understand that completely, and we won't accept the fact that we have this problem. We have a counterintelligence mess on our hands dealing with a country like Iran, who people look at in the government, and I've heard this out of people's mouths, they're just, it's a third world service. It isn't. They're not 10 feet tall, but they're damn good at what they do, and they're patient.
They are.
They have studied us like a advanced calculus class since 1979. And they've been trained by the U.S. government when the Shah was there, trained by the Russians. They've trained themselves. They've worked closely with the Chinese. The Iranians are capable. They're not 10 feet tall, but they are capable, and you have to address that capacity in another way. We can't use a one-size-fits-all covert action strategy. You have to build your strategy and your tools and techniques against what you see in front of you. And I don't think we're doing that. I really don't see it.
Well, you know that my natural reaction is just to say amen to everything that you just said, because you had me at nimble, man,
Yeah.
because even if we're talking within the intelligence community, oh my God, you have just the days when we were relying upon, frankly, guys like you who've, well, how do you know all this? I know all this because I've spent my whole life doing this,
Yeah.
and because I've spent my life in the shadows. Now we want to mass produce this. I was building a training course stateside for an intelligence agency that will remain nameless a few years back, and writing out an exercise for them, and they began to tell me that they wanted my citations to the field manual on which I was relying for my tradecraft. Like, what was my U.S. Army tradecraft manual citation? Because if I couldn't provide one of those, it couldn't be considered valid instructional doctrine. I'm like, I'll tell you what my citation is. A lot of years as a junior officer being banged on the head by chiefs of station who'd been doing it for 30 years, and branch chiefs telling me how to do it, and then doing it 10,000 times in the field,
Hmm.
and then learning from the enemy how to do it better and
Yep.
adopting their tradecraft. Those are my references. This is not, you can't mass produce this. You can't take this out of some little book that you
Yep.
have. What's that line from that movie Armageddon with Bruce Willis, where he confronts the Air Force officer about his U.S. Air Force issued nuclear dr- drilling manual or something? I mean, it's a goofy movie on many levels, but the moment is very real. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, let me see
This is a corporate wildcat driller. This is not how this
you
works, buddy. It doesn't
you have
work like the manual.
you have a manual. I have 40 years of doing this for real. Let's see which one actually works. All
That's
right,
so
John.
true.
John, I want to thank you for being with us. I feel like this is the first of many conversations we need to have going forward.
I look forward to talking to you, Sam, and thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks for being here, and thank you for listening. We'll talk to you next time on Ground Truth.